Human behavior, session 3, biological basis of behavior is the topic which we are going to discuss today. Technically, you are students of management sciences, and human behavior is being studied from mainly from the perspective of organizational behavior, in which you need not to study the psychological way the behavior is required to be studied. Because when we talk about human behavior, there is one technical study about human behavior which we study in the course of medical psychology, medicine psychology, and the other one which we study in this management sciences is not that technical. If you look at the complete course of this human behavior is not emphasized, is not designed in accordance with the field of uh, clinical psychology, but this single topic wants you to have little flair of how exactly the biological patterns are working behind human behavior. So for this class, I have summarized this topic in these couple of screens, which you will just see in a minute. But I also invite you to further study and further explore this topic, because this is going to help you out, because this is a single topic where you would need to ratify things as well. Otherwise, like in the other various topics, there was 90% use of common sense to study human behavior. Like we discussed earlier, that how a human behavior is basically created. So we discussed in the class, in the first class, that it's the thought which comes in the mind of a person. So once that thought is given some importance and that thought is retained in the mind, then that thought converts into a perception. So it all starts from a thought, then thought converts into perception. So now once the perception is holded in the mind, and the person who is holding this perception in the mind, that person continuously keeps on thinking about that perception, that perception converts into belief. So it starts from the thought, that thought converts into perception, that perception converts into belief, and once that belief is retained, you know, once you have an idea in your mind, a thought in your mind, you studied about that thought, you retained that thought, and you, because of your own experiences, you realized or you concluded that the thought is correct, so that thought converted into your perception. So after that thought having got converted into perception, then you continued having that thought retained in your mind, and then you realize that, I mean, the overall experiences of your life are telling you that the perception you're having in your mind is correct. There was no experience you came across which negated that experience. So that way, that perception of yours converts into belief. Now, again, the process of exploring of things around continues, and the brain continuously looks around for the experiences to sort of reconcile that whether if the thought which is retained in the mind is true or not. So once that thought is retained for little longer while, then that perception which got converted into belief, now that from belief, that thought which was only a thought now converts into behavior. So that's a behavior is the process of 4 steps. It all starts from a thought. So it was we discussed that if you really want to change your personality, then you have to change the way you think. With a single most point, you can convert your overall personality. If you want to become a positive person, then you just need to have positive thoughts in your mind. And if you want to have negative person, then let that negative idea which crosses your mind, just let it have, I mean, a space in your mind, and then that negative thought will convert into your perception and eventually believe, then a behavior. So with this, we understood that controlling a human behavior is not that difficult. There is a small control process which you have to initiate, and that in a control process is of initiation of a thought, initiation of controlling of a thought. So in these couple of screens, I'll try to just share the summary form of biological basis of behavior. So in this biological basis of behavior, this particular topic is trying to take us into the brain, a human brain, that how exactly does the human brain works. So this topic now is trying to let you have a flair of how exactly the clinical part of psychology works, how exactly the clinical part of human behavior works. You need not to have much emphasis on that because, as we discussed earlier, that you're not studying the clinical psychology. So this is a topic which is primarily to do with the clinical psychology part of the course. However, so just to have an idea, you have this particular topic with you. So with this topic, you can have a little idea how exactly the process works inside the mind. So it all starts with the nervous system. So cells of nervous system. So I'll be reading this actually content for you so that we could exactly understand that how the technical side of this human behavior is working. So when you talk about the nervous system, so there are two cells which are principally working inside brain, which play a very critical part in biological development of a human behavior. The two cells we are talking about are glia and neurons. Glia and neurons are two cell types that make up the nervous system. The whole nervous system comprises glia and neurons. When glia generally plays supporting role, the communication between neurons is fundamental to all of the functions associated with the nervous system. So principally, out of these two cells we are talking right now, glia and neurons. So glia is actually playing the supporting role. Like in movies, there is a supporting hero, then there is a main hero. So likewise here, the glia is actually playing the supporting role for the main player, which is neuron. So neuron is the actual cell which plays part in the communication of messages from brain to the various parts of the body. So while like it is I mean, also written here, while glia generally plays supporting role, the communication between neuron is fundamental to all of the functions associated with the nervous system. Neuronal, neuronal communication is made possible by neurons' specialized structures. So this communication, which is of neurons, is done through this specialized structure of neurons. The soma contains a cell nucleus, and the dendrites extend from the stoma in tree-like branches. So here we are, I mean, studying right now the biological structure of how exactly the technical part of the brain looks like, which is supporting every human being to have a behavior developed. The axon is another major extension of the cell body. Axons are often covered by a myelin sheath, which increases the speed of transmission of neural impulses. At the end of the axon are terminal buttons that contain synaptic vesicles filled with neurotransmitters. So now you might not be understanding all these terms very easily, but as we discussed in the beginning of the chapter, at the beginning of the session, that these are mainly biological terms. And as the topic itself says, the biological basis of behavior. So these are the biological parts of a human brain we are discussing right now. So you need not to get confused on this. You need to understand, you need not to rather understand, you need to rather just know that these are the various parts of cells which play part in overall development and overall communication system of a brain. Neuronal communication is an electrochemical event. The dendrites contain receptors for neurotransmitters released by nearby neurons. If the signals received from other neurons are sufficiently strong, an action potential will travel down the length of the axon to the terminal buttons, resulting in the release of neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. Action potentials operate on all or none principle and involve the movement of Na plus and K plus across the neuronal membrane. Different neurotransmitters are associated with different functions. Often psychological disorders involve imbalances in a given neurotransmitter system. So we come across often people who have these disorders. They have psychological disorders, they have these mental disorders, they have these behavioral disorders. So here this a particular line is actually telling us that why, I mean, those disorders actually take place. Different neurotransmitters are associated with the different functions. Often psychological disorders involve imbalances in a given neurotransmitter system. So once this neurotransmitter system gets to have an imbalance, then there is a behavioral disorder which we witness. Therefore, psychotropic drugs are prescribed in an attempt to bring the neurotransmitters back into balance. So, I mean, like, once we have different type of disease, we go to different doctors. So likewise, we go to the psychologist once we have these psychological disorders. So drugs can act either as agonists or as antagonists for given neurotransmitter system. So this disorder in the brain takes place due to the disorder in this, this neuron system. So through drugs, this imbalance of neurons can be catered, and the imbalances in the human behavior can be brought back to normal. The brain and spinal cord make up the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is comprised of the somatic and autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system transmits sensory and motor signals to and from the central nervous system. The autonomic nervous system controls the function of our organs and glands and can be divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Sympathetic activation prepares us for fight or flight, while parasympathetic activation is associated with normal functioning under relaxed conditions. Like often you come across situation when there is a situation when you get into the state of nervousness. So when we get nervous, whenever there is a disaster taken place, so out of the two, any one situation takes command. I mean, the thing which we have just discussed here, the autonomic nervous system controls the function of our organs and glands and can be divided into two sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. I mean, once there is a situation that you come across a troublesome situation and you feel like running away, you see there's an element of panic inside you, and you would not want to face that situation, and you would want to run away from that situation. Then in such situation, sympathetic activation prepares, uh, is this process of getting into panic, and this panic decision of fight or flight. You see, you would like, I mean, your brain starts getting into this nervous state, in which you decide that whether if you should face the situation or should rather run away. This is normally a situation of panic, and in this panic situation you have this fight or flight decision taking place in your mind. Sympathetic activation prepares us for fight or flight, while parasympathetic activation is associated with normal functioning under relaxed conditions. So when there is normal circumstance, when things are not very troublesome, when you have experienced a lot of experiences of different troubles, different problematic situations, then in such circumstances there is no potential of those external events to disturb you. Our biological behaviors gets to have disturbance from these external events. So once we have peace inside our mind, these external events cannot distort us, cannot disturb us. But once these the external, I mean, once our inner system, and once we have not much, but we do not have much exposure to troublesome situations, then we will be surprised. Our brain gets surprised because that is the first time we're coming across that situation, and the first time, most of the time, gives us a surprise. So in such circumstances, this sympathetic activation takes place, and that sympathetic activation forces us to take the decision between fight and flight. So once you have this repeated exposure of these situation of challenge, once you face these challenges repeatedly, then your brain gets trained, and it does not require to be in that fight or flight situation. So no matter how troublesome the situation is, you remain calm, you remain composed. The composure does not get disturbed because of the external event. The best example which I studied was, there are like two horses. One horse is across the railway line. There is a wall, and I mean there is a railway crossing, and from that railway crossing at a distance there is a wall, and behind that wall there is a horse. So once there is a train which is passing by, So the horse which is standing at a distance, so that horse gets to have an attack of panic. Whenever that horse listens to this very monstrous sound of this train which is crossing the railway line, then since the horse has not witnessed that what exactly is that thing which is creating or producing or is the reason of that sound, so there is this element of fear. The horse which is tied at a distance behind the wall, that horse gets into panic. So, till the time the train is crossing the railway line and with that particular sound, the horse which is tied with a rope on the other side of the wall continuously keeps on jumping. There is that fight or flight situation is in the mind of that horse. That horse is worried, that horse is worried that what the monster is actually going to come and going to create a threat for that horse's life. So the horse tries to run away but cannot run because of that rope which is through which it is actually tied. So the horse other side keeps on jumping, and that reason of the jump of the body is because of the trouble which is being sensed in the mind of that horse. That's the sympathetic activation which is taking place, which is fight or flight. In the same example, there was discussed another horse which was tied right next to the railway line. I mean, so the first horse was, there was a huge distance. Then there was a big wall, and behind that wall there was that horse, which was facing panic every time that railway train was crossing the railway line. But there was another horse which was tied right next to that railway line. So now, since that particular horse has repeated exposure of that train, and that horse has realized that, I mean, multiple time with the multiple experiences, the horse has realized that initially the horse went into panic, but there's a thing which comes, creates that sounds, and that sustains for a while, and then once that thing is gone, the voice gets over. So the same horse, so the other horse which is tied right next to the railway line, since the horse can witness that the thing which is crossing by is not creating any life threat for the horse. So eventually, with these repeated experiences, there is a balance inside the mind of that horse. There is parasympathetic activation. From sympathetic activation, which was creating nervousness, there's a second state which is now active, which is parasympathetic activation. And in that state, which we have just discussed, there is normal functioning which is taking place. Parasympathetic activation is associated with normal functioning under relaxed conditions. So once we have, as a human being, once we have repeated exposures to difficult situations, once we keep on experiencing the adventurous situations in our life, then a time comes that our mind becomes normal, during those various panic situations. For some, those situations are circumstances of what trouble is actually taking place all around, but that trouble does not have any capacity or capability to disturb the inner calmer self of that particular human being. So therefore, this is the reason why we say that the more you have practice, the more you become perfect. Practice makes a man perfect. There's this statement. So same applies here. Once you have this repeated exposure to the various risk-taking circumstances, your life becomes pretty normal, pretty okay, and pretty normal with that. So the next part which we're going to discuss right now is brain and spinal cord. Brain consists of two hemispheres, each controlling the opposite side of the body. The brain consists of two hemispheres, each controlling the opposite side of body. Each hemisphere can be subdivided into different lobes: frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. In addition to the lobes of the cerebral cortex, the forebrain include the thalamus, sensory relay, limbic system, emotions, and memory circuit. The midbrain contains the reticular formation, which is important for sleep and arousal, as well as the substantia nigra and ventral tegmental area. So now all these are biological terms. You need not to get confused or worried. These are terms which you need to retain in your mind as it is, because these are certain biological terms. You might not be understanding the meaning of these, but these biological terms are basically various parts of your brain, and these are the names of various biological parts of the brain, which are the reason why there is biological behavior taking place inside. I mean, developing inside your mind. So these structures are important for movements, reward, and addictive processes. The hindbrain contains the structures of the brainstem, medulla, pons, and midbrain, which controls automatic functions like breathing and blood pressure. So now, as you can see from this content, that there are different parts of the brain which have different functions divided. Different parts of the brains are doing different functions at at that particular moment. So the hindbrain contains the structures of the brain, brainstem, medulla, pons, and midbrain, which controls automatic functions like breathing and blood pressure. The hindbrain also contains the cerebellum, which helps. So just let me take you to the relevance, part of again the brain spinal cord where we were at that time. So these structures are important for movement reward. Okay, so we were actually studying these different parts of the brain. So let's start from here, from this part. Each hemisphere can be subdivided into different lobes: frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. In addition to the lobes of cerebral cortex, the forebrain includes thalamus, sensory relay, and limbic system, emotion, and memory circuit. The midbrain contains the reticular formation, which is important for sleep and arousal. The midbrain is to do with your sleep and arousal part, as the substantia nigra and ventral tegmental area. These structures are important for movement, reward, and addictive processes. The hindbrain contains the structure of brainstem, medulla, pons, and midbrain, which controls automatic function like breathing and blood pressure. So these two things are uh, controlled by the hindbrain part of your body. The hindbrain also contains of your brain. The hindbrain also contains the cerebellum, which helps coordinate movement and certain types of memories. So just let me. Individuals with brain damages have been studied extensively to provide information about the role of different areas of the brain, and recent advances in technology allow us to glean similar information by imaging brain structure and functions. These techniques include CT, PET, MRI, fMRI, and EEG. So, from these various terms, you can actually understand that mainly these are biological terms which you need to remember. Once you will have this topic studied through any book or explored through any book, because I would invite you all to do study this topic from any book, because this actually is a vast topic. In this particular topic, there are specializations done in the clinical psychology. So this topic is actually a huge topic. So you cannot study this particular topic in great detail. So you just need to have uh, a holistic understanding of how exactly this thing works. So even if the question comes in the exam, so you would need to write about mainly that, what exactly the biological part, biological reasons of behavior to do with your particular course. You would write that, you see, that why the human behavior takes place the way human behavior is actually taking place. So many times you have come across so many human beings who, once they have this sleep disorder, so they have different type of behaviors. So once you have this sleep disorder, so the brain functions becomes there are becomes change becomes change become different. So there are biological things which are distorting the normal functioning of mind because of that lack of sleep. So the mind would want to work normally, but that because of this lack of rest situation, the mind would not be in situation to behave like a normal in the normal way. So for that reason, so once we have this sleep disorder, so the brain is going to be working in a different manner. So likewise, once you have there are lot of people you would know who have I mean this alcoholic addiction. So people with these negative addictions, they also have their brains not working in the normal conditions, because the normal brain would behave differently in situations, but the addictive brain is going to become differently. The addictive brain normally becomes numb, because this all communication to various parts of the body is taking place through neurons. So this neural part of brain becomes goes on little halt, because when a brain is given the addiction of this alcohol, the functioning of the brain gets to halt. It goes to little pause for a while. It goes to a little deadly state when the brain is goes to a sleep mode for a while, and the normal functioning of brain totally gets disturbed. So that is the reason why you must have studied, you must have witnessed that there are, or you must have not only witnessed, you must have gotten to know through the various television media programs and movies that there are people who are mental. They have different way of responding and reacting in situations. They do not have any logical order of their behavior. Their behaviors are actually different because their mind works in very abnormal way. I mean, they have this imaginary thing taking place inside their mind, which is not in reality. Imagination parts of their mind becomes hyperactive, and they would think that there are certain things taking place which are not there actually. You must have heard about schizophrenia, which is another state of psychology. In this schizophrenia, a person affected with schizophrenia would feel as if there is certain, I mean, there is a certain incident which has taken place, but in reality, there isn't anything. Isn't anything which has taken place like such. The way that person would be perceiving. So that imagination part of the body of the brain becomes so strong that the imaginary mind, the videos that plays, the imaginary mind, the various circumstances, the way memory is played on that imagination part is done in a manner that the person who is affected with schizophrenia would feel as if the things are in taking place in reality. Just a best example can be like when so many times we see a dream, and if the dream was scary, then in the morning what we would feel that we are actually scared. So many times when we see a good and happy dream, so once you wake up in the morning, so we feel very happy. So these two are the examples, in which we could understand that how biologically our brain is functioning. Once we were sleeping and we witnessed a bad dream, we then the bad dream created the communication system between neurons and various parts of the body in a different manner. There was an element of chaos and panic because of that negative dream inside the mind, and there was a communication taking place for a while, as if the dream which was seen was, person would get an impression as if this was a real dream. This was something which has taken place in real. If that depends also state upon the intensity of that dream the person was into. Sometimes we are just in the lighter mode of sleep, but sometimes we are very we are actually sleeping with very intense sleep. And in such circumstances, the dreams which we witness during those such circumstances gets to have more impact on our brains. So therefore, like I said, that in this particular the particular various small screens which I have just started in front of you, there are portions of psychology which we have discussed. So these are the things which might would look like to you very very confusing. So the reason why you would find them confusing is that these are various parts of your brain which are discussed over here. So spinal cord, neurons, how these two things are taking, working out in creation of a behavior, how the person with addiction has different way of responding in situation, how a person with good dream would respond in situation, how a person who controls the thoughts and always thinks positive in circumstances would react and would have a behavior in situations. So there are people who would have troubles all around. They would, I mean, there are two type there would be two type of people. One would be a person who is seeing this whatever is taking place all around. That person is going to take it very personal and is going to think that, you see, whatever is actually happening is because of the bad luck of that own, that person's. So because of that thing, the brain is going to take negative messages, and the person is eventually going to go on halt. He will not have energy to work all around, because he'll imagine as if the bad luck is actually playing part, and because of that bad luck he will not be able to do anything. While the other person with a positive mental attitude will take all the things which are taking place in all surroundings in a positive manner. He will continue working with the same vigor, with the same energies, and he will remain or she will remain ballistic, because, I mean, he or she will not take all the external circumstances as personal. That person would rather think that all these various circumstances are an opportunity to learn new ways of life, because always we learn new way of life when we have bumpy road. When we have smooth sailing road, we have smooth sailing seas, we do not get to learn new things. The sailing is always going to be tough in rough waves. So likewise the driving is always going to be tough on the bumpy roads, on the hilly areas. So likewise life is always going to be tough once there are circumstances which are not favorable. But these are the circumstances which strengthens your experiences, which strengthens your nervous system. So you need to be positive. Like in the beginning of this session we discussed that it's actually the thought through which we can actually mold our overall behaviors. So in today's topic we have discussed about biological reasons why we behave the way we behave. So and how exactly, I mean, the biological part of the brain is functioning to create the any certain type of behavior. So but also we studied that despite having all these physical ways, biological ways the brain is working, we by controlling our thoughts, and we by controlling our perceptions regarding the external events, we can actually control our moods, we can actually control our behaviors. So need to be positive, control your thoughts, and always be positive in every circumstances. I again would like to reiterate this, that you would need to study this topic from the book as well. Just go on any just try to find this book from any psychology book. And because this is a vast topic, like I said, that there are people who do doctorates in it. So this is very huge subject. So normally this is a subject of clinical psychology, but we just need to have a little awareness that how exactly the biological part of the brain is working uh, behind in when a person is behaving in a way, the way that person is behaving. So with this I conclude the session, and I hope that you would have uh, found this session very, very interesting, and we will be meeting again in the next session.